Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raina Ghazi, and I'm the Teacher Development Manager for Macmillan Education International Curriculum and Caribbean. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this afternoon in the UK with Debbie Roberts, who's going to be focusing on the importance of books, both digital and physical books as well. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer your questions. I'll pass it over to Debbie now. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome. It's great to be here with you all. I am speaking about something that I'm very passionate about today, so please feel free to stop, ask me questions, anything you would like to share, please share it in the chat box or ask away, and I'll do my very, very best to answer any of your queries or questions, because this is a session that's really, really close to my heart. So I'll talk to you about it all day long. So as you can see, a child who reads will be an adult who thinks. Now that's not just an off-the-cuff remark, actually. That is really based on evidence and research. I've been researching this a great deal recently, and I will be researching this even more, because hopefully this will be the foundation of a PhD course that I'm hopefully starting very soon. So I have got a lot of research on this, but I am going to try and make it as topical as I possibly can. So good morning, St. Lucia, Valerie, great to see you, and Haida from the Virgin Islands. Welcome. So let's get on and have a look at what our objectives are really. I really like this quote that I've got here. Books are the quietest and most constant of friends. And I think that's a really nice thing to say. They're accessible, wisest counsellors, somewhere where we turn to. So we've got lots of people joining us now from Jamaica. Hello from Jamaica, rather. Turks and Caicos. I was speaking about your lovely islands the other day. That was one of my very last trips abroad. And Jamaica again. I can see some people that we've seen before. Joanne there from the Bahamas. I think we've met before. So that's lovely. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time and joining us. I'm just going to try and move this little box. There we go. Now I can see you all a bit more clearly. So, reading for pleasure has a really, really positive impact on a child's education. We've known this for quite some time. Reading, we understand and have always accepted, has a very positive impact on a child's education, but reading for pleasure. We now know that reading for pleasure actually impacts in so many different ways. And I think this has become ever more important and interesting because now there's more research on it because of the pandemic. So hi to Russia. Hi there. Thank you for signing in and saying good morning. Good morning to everyone. Okay, so the importance of reading. Right, this is kind of the objective of what I want to talk to you about today. The importance of reading, but try to address or begin to think about, do we read better if we're taught to read using electronic devices, or do we actually read better and make more progress if we're looking at paper books, the traditional paper books? That's my interest. That's where my interest lies. So there's a lot of research about the enjoyment, the pleasure, the benefits, the negatives of reading from the two different formats. But my real interest, as someone who's working in education, as you yourselves are, is, do children actually learn better? Do they learn better from electronic devices or not? So that's really what this is all about. We know that reading is important. We know that it expands our vocabulary. We know that we can trial different languages. We can use a different language. We can explore and experiment with language by reading. It helps us to become an independent person and to build confidence, to be more articulate, to be able to confidently communicate. It helps us to follow rules and to stay safe. Think about safety warnings. Think about safety information and how it's shared with us. Reading is really important to be able to access that. It also improves our listening skills. It increases our exposure to language, and often academic language, and a language that we wouldn't necessarily use anywhere else other than in education. It improves writing skills. It improves the ability to be able to write using different vocabulary, which means that we can address a larger audience. It helps us to listen, to understand. It enhances the imagination. I recently ran a 2-day training residential course based around one child's book. The whole 2-day event, and it was directed at science, technology, engineering, art, mathematics, and it was all based around this one physical paper book. And it was an experiment, I admit that, but it actually worked really well. So books are entertaining, they keep us occupied, they take us to a different world. We have a quiet moment and we open up the whole world by reading these books. It improves grammar and punctuation because we learn from the author. We learn from the experts how to use grammar correctly and how to punctuate correctly without being sat in front of a board or a class and being told. We see it, we experience it, and we appreciate it. And so a child's reading skills are important to their success in school. Throughout this webinar, I've tried to put in lots of data, lots of research, and the people who are responsible for that research as well. I'm happy to share that with you. So reading academically is slightly different. There's a point where we read where it stops almost, and we need to progress into a different direction to become academically efficient at reading. But it not only is about words and vocabulary, and let me just share something with you, some of the research I came across recently, and I've shared this before, I think, with some of you. Try not to give children definitions of words, and this is students from a whole range, actually, not just children. This is anybody who's learning. Try not to define words for the student. Let them experience, let them play with the word, let them hear the word, vocalize the word, write the word, see the word, experience, have a full bodied experience of the vocabulary, and then ask them to define it for themselves. Giving children definitions, it doesn't stick in the long-term memory. It kind of just floats over. And the problem is they think they understand the word, so they don't try to find out anything else about it. They just accept it, forget it. By letting them experience it, it becomes it's established in their long-term memory. It develops listening skills. Actually, reading develops listening and improves writing and encourages questioning. All these things improve memory. And in education, whether we like it or not, we're very dependent on a good memory of deeper intellectual information, because that's what we're examined on. And ultimately, when a student is examined, the results also monitor the teacher. So we're very heavily engrossed in our jobs in assessment, whether we like it or not. So let's do things slightly differently to support students in being successful in assessment. And reading is one of the things, and it doesn't have to be about the subject that they'll be examined in. So reading's essential in everyday life. And as teachers and educators, we take it for granted that teaching surrounds us. A parent said to me recently, "What, you want us to have a library in our house?" And I said, "Well, I kind of am. Yeah, I do." And I think if there are funds there, uh, we should have a library in our houses. Children should have access to a good range. And if I could sum up this webinar in one statement, it would be a good range of reading materials and resources. That's what we need to provide for our children. My first teaching job was in a secondary school, a science laboratory. I had a library in my science laboratory, and it was made up of books and magazines and journals that had been given to me. I didn't really buy anything, but it's just the idea that children and students have got that access to a range of materials. Readers increases. It increases your crystallized intelligence. A few little facts here. So children perform generally 20 points higher on IQ tests than they did in the early 20th century. So we are becoming more intelligent. Bill Gates claims to read about 50 books a year. That's equates to what? One a week, roughly. Sometimes he might have a break. He might read a bigger book or read half a book that week. Now, he's got an IQ of 160, which is well above average. But more importantly, I think he's a billionaire. So reading 50 books a year, and he states that really that is his only preparation to being an IQ, to having an IQ of over 160. And he links that directly to reading. And so do many others. If you start researching it, you will see that many other successful people, academically and in business, are avid readers. The more they read, the better they become. Ultimately, that's the message. The more our students read, the better they will become in many different areas. Children's books written for children seem to engage children more, and as they're engaged more, they want to read it. They want to be involved. They want to be reading that book. They want to know the outcome. They want to know the end. I was going to share a picture, a photograph with you, and I completely forgot. So my godson is 6 in a couple of weeks, and he's a typical boy. He's not particularly interested in reading, and doesn't really want to do anything other than kick a football around or ride his bike. And I came across some books that I used on that residential course, and I can't really share the name of the book with you, but there was something about pooping in it, which I thought might, interest him, and it did. And my friend sent me a picture of us reading together, and you can see that he is completely engrossed in the story and wanting to turn the pictures faster than I could read the words, because he wanted to know what the end result was. And that's what we mean by books that are specifically written for their audience. So some children, some students are not that interested in education. So we need to find what interests them. I read some research about someone who wasn't interested in reading at all, and he came across a Beano comic, an old Beano comic, and it fascinated him. And he suddenly had to learn to read because he wanted to know the story more. So reading with a child in primary school for just 20 minutes a day improves their reading skills. And that's based on research. That's based on evidence. 20 minutes a day improves reading skills. And here's my question, and I'll be studying this for 4 years. Is paper reading more effective? More effective than what? More effective than any other type of reading, which could be a tablet, it could be a Kindle, it could be reading on a laptop, a computer screen, Is it more effective? And yes, it is. It is more effective. It's more effective when learning. If we're reading for pure pleasure as an adult, then we're already a proficient reader, my argument would be. And so we're no longer reading to make academic progress, we're reading for pleasure. But as a student, when I say we're learning to read, I mean we're becoming to that academic level, to the highest level of reading. Paper reading is more effective. Please bear that in mind. Because when we're reading online, I know someone who, if I send a report or a script for a book or something, they will print it off and read the paper. And I used to do that. Now I've developed my skills and I can read online. But if you really focus when you're reading online, if you really think back to the last document you read online, you flick. You're looking all over the place all of the time. You might look to the end of the sentence and then you might flick a few pages, look at a picture, there'll be a video link, there'll be an advertisement. It's very fast paced. Online reading is designed to be quick. It's not designed for in-depth reading, and that comes from the manufacturers. That's the point of online reading. The brain processes digital reading in a completely different way than it does paper. We're encouraged to scroll. We're encouraged to speed read, which is fine if you have the opportunity to then go back and deep read. Where it drains our mental resources, just the reading of it, just the focusing on word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, actually drains our mental resources. I'm not talking about reading a sentence, analysing the information. Just the actual process of reading is already draining our mental resources before we start to process the information. And we process that very, very quickly. And all this is known as shallowing hypotheses. Shallowing hypotheses is a scientific statement that is used in research about this. Because of the shallowing hypotheses, the information is retained much less in depth, but it's retained for a reduced amount of time. It prevents readers from navigating long text successfully and retaining the information they engage with. That is part of a conclusion of only an 8 months, but an 8 months research by the Literacy Society. It prevents readers from navigating long text successfully and retaining the information they engage with. And that sentence, that statement, is what grabbed my interest. I am passionate about education. I want every single child everywhere in the world to have an equal opportunity to be the best that they possibly can be. And if we can get them to a deep, successful reader less painfully, that's a good thing. And this statement is what got me interested in this background and wanting me to take this further and research this for the next 4 years with students, hopefully around the globe. Because, just question yourself 1 second, if they can't navigate long text successfully and they can't retain the information, what does that tell us about the future of these children academically? They can't really pass an exam, can they? If they can't navigate a long text successfully and they can't remember what they've read, then we're doing them a massive disservice because they can't really access the assessment structure that we have in place at the moment. Would you agree with me? Please tell me you do. If you can hear any noise, I do apologise. The people outside are just decided to do some major road work, so I do apologise. Yep. Oh, I'm glad you all agree with me. Francois, Anna, Maria, Valerie. Thank you so much for saying you agree. And it is a major problem. Processing long text is a major problem. And I would imagine a lot of you will tell me, if you said to your students, why can't you engage with this? Why don't you want to get involved? It's boring. Why is it boring? Because they can't access the information. That's why it's boring. You literally put in reams of words in front of them, but they can't actually access the information. And it's almost like telling a story to a child just with random words. If you were reading to them in a foreign language that they didn't understand, of course it's boring, because they can't engage with the context. They can't engage with the information. So yeah, it's boring. And so we need to teach them how to read at a much deeper level. We are encouraged to break it into chunks, that is true, but when they're sat in an exam, you can't say, do 10 minutes now and come back tomorrow and do another 10 minutes. We need to train them to engage with in-depth, long text in preparation for terminal assessment. That's our job. We need to teach them to read, but we need to teach them to read in a certain way. That's the point of it. The value of paper reading is that we get to a much deeper level of understanding, a much deeper intellectual understanding of level, because they're engaged with the information, they're engaged with the text, they start questioning it, they start reading it in a different way. The text in a paper, if you've picked a book up, you tend to flick through it and look, oh, it's got 97 pages, oh, it's got 23 chapters, oh, it's got some pictures in it, oh, there's a map, there's a diagram. How many of you honestly can say you do that first? You will do, because you're academics, and that's what academics do, because you've been taught to read in that way. You start gathering information before you've read the first word. Paper books need to be read, reread. Read a little bit. I don't really understand that. Flick back. Right, yeah. Oh, sunny in Jamaica, 25 degrees. Thanks for that, Frederick. That's brilliant. It's about 17 here. Dull, damp, rainy. I wish I was there. Anyway, it helps us to retain information, which results in a deep reading. The text is completely processed in a different way. If you watch a child read, they're touching the book, they're turning the pages, they feel the pages, they feel if the pages have got some kind of indentations or raised images. They're visualizing because they're looking at the colours, the diagrams. There's a smell of books. I recently went with Raina to a museum where books were stored, ancient books, and it's the smell of it. When you walk into a library or somewhere where there's lots of books, so all your senses are stimulated, and that helps us to remember. It's a much slower process reading a paper book. It's more methodical. This reassures lots of younger children. There's a structure and a method to working through the book. And that method and that structure and that pattern, it reassures us. Children like structure. They like rules, whether they say they do or not. They do. And we give that through paper books. They can check the facts, they can go back and forth, they can keep working through and working back, and that includes, in that encourages memory retention. And this supports and gives the foundation of accessing academic text. When do we start reading? We know as academics from a very, very young age, from 0. We start reading stories to our children when they're babies, because babies like the sound of our voice And how do we learn to read? And how do we learn to speak? We learn by mimicking adults. We learn by looking and copying. And that's how humans learn every skill that we have. We encourage reading through practice when children, the evidence tells us when children see their parents reading, they want to read. So often a parent will be sat reading an academic paper, a newspaper, a magazine, and a child will pick up a child's book because it's the norm and it's what they can see you doing. They want to do the same. They want to listen to stories that are read by their parents because it gives comfort. How do children learn to read? Well, they learn to read in lots of different ways, but the most important way is to be read aloud. So they're looking at the words, they're listening to your voice, they're linking the sound with the written word, and that's the beginning of learning to read. Reading with young children, reading out aloud, stimulates their imagination. Your voice changes, it goes higher, it goes lower. You put on different voices, you make animal noises, you thud along, and all these things stimulate the imagination and start children wondering and wanting to know more and wanting to be engaged with the text. It expands our understanding of the real world. In a book, children might witness and experience something that they might never in the real life. I remember working with some children who've never left the village where they were born. And we learned about places all around the globe that were linked to the subject that we were learning about. And it brought it alive to them. And they wanted to know more. Listening develops speaking. If we speak well, when we're learning to read, if we get to a certain level, we don't really get interested or bothered or worried about pronunciation because it doesn't really matter. We want the children to be engaged in the written word. But there comes a point where we have to start to correct pronunciation because if we don't, they can't actually access that higher academic level of text. And that's because the words might get more complex, or the words, the sentences become longer, more in depth, and all this makes it more challenging. And so pronunciation is needed at that point. It is the foundation for written word. Reading out aloud develops reading skills further and further. To this day, most people enjoy listening to books being read to them. And we know that to be true because of the popularity of audiobooks. Audiobooks have become increasingly popular during lockdown because I think people who wouldn't normally engage in a book have enjoyed listening to another voice. There are many people during the pandemic who spent a lot of time by themselves. And so listening to audio text is almost like having someone else in the room. But as humans, we do take comfort from listening to other humans. And so reading out loud at any age is really a good way to develop skills further. And don't forget, reading from a paper book develops and stimulates all of the senses. It is a multisensory experience, and that's why it's more engaging and more interesting. When you're talking and reading with children, as a teacher, you might not get a great deal of time. Someone's just said this, I can reading paper books to my student is a priority. Yeah, it definitely is. And I'm going to look at that further with you in a little while because this year is different. Academically, for all of us, this year is different. And so, yes, we will be teaching in a different way, I think, and reading paper books is probably more important now than it ever has been. But we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Still welcoming lots of people, so hello and welcome to this session. Trinidad, Tobago and Jamaica. So welcome everyone. We communicate with each other using vocabulary. Now that might be verbalised or we might sign, but ultimately it all is down to vocab, to key vocabulary. To use that successfully, reading gives us confidence. We want to talk about the books with our children at any age. All students, all children, we need to discuss the book because it's an opportunity for children to respond to the text. Well, I don't think that would have happened like that. I think they would have done it like that. Why did she say that? Why did he get angry? Why did he shout? Why did she shout back? Why did they throw the ball? It gets them engrossed in the text. And when they're engrossed in the text, what are they doing? They're using vocabulary. They're verbalising it, they're questioning it, they're making sense of it, they're explaining it. And so being involved in discussions and communication about the text brings out and develops so many other skills. We can appreciate other cultures and heritage. We can introduce different heritages, different cultures into their everyday reading experience. And sometimes ignorance develops many negative situations. But by developing their experience in certain things, they become educated, they understand it much better. And so it resolves a lot of problems and a lot of issues because the children become more educated. It develops emotional intelligence. Oh, she's crying. Why is that person sad? Why is that person happy? Why is that person dancing in the rain? It develops emotional intelligence and they can bring them back to themselves and their own situations and think, that character did that. Maybe I should try that. It was okay for them. Might be okay for me. Develops cognitive mental stimulation and exercises the brain. Remember, the brain is a muscle and it's busily firing neurological messages on its neurons around the brain. And the more we do that, the more we develop. And so reading to a child from a book develops its brain exercise, develops creativity, makes children think about things, makes them see things from a different angle and to develop that confidence to be creative. It nurtures growth and development. Please remember, these are not my ideas. These are all from research. This is what the research is telling us. It helps with depression. Now, normally we might not be as concerned or in tune with depression and anxiety and stress with the age ranges that we might teach. We know we should be, but often we have other priorities, as people are putting in their in the chat box, that their focus is this or it's that. Normally, it wouldn't really be a massive focus to it, but it's so true at the moment. It's so true that children now are dealing with things that we've never dealt with before. There is a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of tension. I've got children saying to me when I see them, luckily I've been able to be in schools, and I've got children telling me that they're worried, they're behind, they can't catch up, they don't know how to catch up, they don't understand. Their sister had done this, this and this, and they haven't done it. And so there is a lot of concern and anxiety in even young children. This was a young child. This was a 7-year-old speaking to me about their concern that they were so far behind. So if reading to a child, to a group of children, allowing them to read together and allowing them to read independently and in private helps with depression. And that is based off research. That's a fact based on research. It enhances empathy, makes us think about how other people might be feeling. And another quote for you there, reading for pleasure has a very positive impact on a child's educational performance. In fact, reading for pleasure is more likely to determine whether a child does well at school than their social or economic background. Now, when I started out in education, thank you, Francois, I'm glad you think that. And oh yeah, there is something about the smell of a book. Yep, as I said earlier on, when you walk into that book-filled room, yeah, it does stimulate your senses for sure. Okay, so we used to look at the demographics of where a child came from, the social and economic background, and we could almost use this to determine how well they would do academically. Now, we also know that if a child says they enjoy reading, if a child's observed reading because they want to read, we have a good idea that they will be more successful academically. Excuse me. I'll just take a drink. Sorry, I've been unwell lately, and this is my first webinar. I could not let you down. So Metzner is a researcher, and he says that when a child reads from a book freely, they might focus on one word for a while, or they might skip that word because they don't really understand it, but they'll come back to it. Oh gosh, sorry about this. Which they don't necessarily do that. They have the freedom to skip. Sorry. As soon as you start, can't stop, can you? They have the freedom to skip and revisit. An e-reading presentation is not designed to do that. It's designed to rely on rapid serial presentation. That's why you get adverts snipping up and coming up. You get pictures coming up. You suddenly might get a piece of music or a recommendation for a similar book. E-reading is not designed to be studied, to be skipped, to go backwards and forwards. It's just not. And words are presented for a fixed duration. So they're not really, it's not expected that they will nip back and forth, and that one child might read it really quickly and another child might want to study that page. This is what I'm interested in. What impact will e-reading, and I mean e-reading on tablets, computers, Kindles, tablets, handheld computers, that's what I'm referring to here. I'm really interested in what impact this will have. Schotteritel states that we should not interfere with the ability to revisit. It's that important. We should not interfere with that. Too many times I'm observing teachers and they say, come on, we've got to move on now. We haven't got all day. We've only got so many weeks to finish this course. You're better off teaching something in depth that they will understand, process, and record and retrieve when they need to. Better off doing that for only one or two things than skipping through the whole course. And I've said that so many times in so many places around the world. Comprehension is seriously impaired when revisit is not possible. This impacts negatively, massively negatively on the understanding of text and the gaining of knowledge. And so we must allow them time. This comment came from one of my head teachers. She's a member of the Head Teachers Forum in the UK, but I think it's pretty much around the globe. She said that maybe 10% of the time would be directed at eBooks or e-reading, and they've got some brilliant resources where you can access all these books, and they've got little comprehension tests, and I observed some children using these. It was very, very, very fast paced. And she said that maybe 10% of that time would be directed, reading time would be directed at this kind of reading, at this resource. And she said, really, it was for children who were disengaged, who were not really bothered about reading, who they couldn't get to pick up a book, who they couldn't get to engage with a book. And so she said that they almost allowed this form of reading to try and get children engaged and interested, but they didn't really rely on it for children to learn to read. She said during the pandemic, this shifted to about 70%, if not more. Minimum 70%, because they were able to share books with children outside the classroom. She's now concerned that they come back to the classroom, and because teachers have got a lot to catch up on, that children are still heavily dependent on e-readers and electronic books. It feels like the students don't rely on the teacher for advice and support so much now. They're following their own path without an experienced guide. Now, as some of you know who've met me before, I'm an inquiry-based practitioner. I'm an inquiry-based lead. We can't leave children to develop anything on their own path without a guide. In inquiry-based leading, we are the guide. We guide them through whatever stage in their education they're at. We try to avoid the pitfalls. We try to make a direct route. Without that, children appear to be reading, but are they actually making any progress? What long-term impact do you think this will have on our learners? When will we find out? I hope you agree with me, and someone is typing at the moment, so I'm interested in if you agree with me. What long-term impact will this have on our learners? I think they won't be able to access academic papers. They will appear to be able to read. They will read. They will have a nice reading age because they will be able to tick the boxes early on. Long term, if you remember a while back when we talked about accessing academic level of literature necessary for terminal assessments, we don't think this type of learning will allow that. And when will we find out? When it's too late. Are we being encouraged to make the paper book extinct? It says they will have to read later for necessary information. Yes, they will. But will they have learned how to read if we're dependent on e-learners? That's the question. Yes, we know they will need to, they'll have to, but will they be able to? Or will we have failed them? Because they will seem engaged in e-learners and e-readers. They will seem very engaged, they'll seem very interested, but are they actually learning to read? Right, are we making paper books extinct? Got free downloads, lots of current books out there, access to audio books. But reading is actually faster than listening, by the way. The average adult reads text around 250 to 300 words a minute, and a talking speed is 150 to 160. So e-readers on audio readers will not. They won't. They will not support reading. They may call words, but lack comprehension skills. Yes, exactly. That is so true. So why do we use ebooks? Okay, this is the information that I'm told. This is based on a lot of research. The reason that we've become users of ebooks is because they do interest reluctant readers. The National Literacy Trust says that there are advantages. Positive results in reading attitudes, attainment and behaviour. Reading ability improved, especially in boys. But this was a 4-month study. And they did gain up to 8 months, especially in boys. I hate this girl boy division, but this is based on research, so there is a division in learning to read. Some of the girls' reading ages increased by 7 months, and some of the boys' reading ages increased by 8 months, but it was only a 4-month study. Ebooks can encourage a passion for paper reading. So by reading an ebook, they might then want to pick up a paper book, a bit like when you've seen a good movie, you might want to read the book. Before, 10% of children said they enjoyed paper reading, but after this study, but it was only a 4-month study, which academically 40% said they enjoyed it. So that research from the National Literacy Trust is supported by this research in that it can encourage children to want to learn to read, to want to pick up a book. Another quote, this suggests that access to ebooks might actually open up a wider world of reading for reluctant readers. Now, for a reluctant reader, we say, hooray, they're reading. When they're no longer a reluctant reader, we need to switch them back to paper reading, or we need to increase paper reading if we want them to reach the absolute best that they can be. Okay, I mean, it's huge. Readers in society, since they're following their own path without an experienced guide, the future generations will have a mindset they are all right and nobody else. more breathe of rebels. Like, okay. Research and curriculum relevant content may be at risk. Thank you, Frederick. That's exactly what I think. E-reading will not be enough. That is it. You have got it. It is not enough. The idea of touching the words, feeling the paper, doing much more. Okay, that's brilliant. We know as teachers, if we can stimulate the senses whilst learning something else, it's more likely to stick. And so that's what we need to be doing. So it's great for reluctant readers. It gets them involved. It can't be everything. The benefits of ebooks then, it's good. All reading is good practice. Provides a lot of choice. It can be cost effective and it appears cost effective, but is it really? They're easier to read, really. Got a built-in dictionary. We can change the font size. There's a web where we can ask questions about the text. We can digitally annotate. We can, but there's nothing better than a highlighter, is there, people? Look at that. I've got one right at hand. We've always got a highlighter at hand. I do a lot of editing online and it's not the same. It's not the same as I said earlier. So give them the opportunity to learn from a paper book. The advantages of paper books. Okay, so they report more enjoyment. And I think early on they have to. The graphics, the paper, the way that it's, the colours, textures. They're more likely to exceed a reading age when using paper books. Yes, they are. Beyond that 4-month trial, the information I gave you on the previous slide, they are more likely to exceed. It's another choice, and more choices mean passionate readers. Choice of ebooks has improved, and we think there are millions, but actually they're still limited, and the choices of paper books are actually greater for children between 7 to 16-year-olds, but they're much less under 7. There are some, but not as many as you think. Paper books, more information's absorbed. It's much kinder to the eyes, and that's a proven thing. Research has been done about how the eyes move when reading a book, and reading a paper book, they don't really move a great deal. An e-reader, they're all over the place looking at the picture. This is flashing on, that's there, there's an advert, there's a picture, there's an animation. Having a library at home is linked to higher academic achievement. Yay! Paper reading has been found by researchers to be more efficient, and that's based on the research by Clinton. Ebooks run out of battery because there's so many pop-up ads, and don't forget the power failures. Okay, doing research, everything's e-based, and it's proven, there are a lot of distractions. If it's difficult for you, imagine what it must be like for a child learning to read. Yeah, people are saying that they retain more information from paper. Lots of people are saying that they're retaining more information from paper. Okay, so yep, the impact of reading before bed. There's an absolute host, and here we are on this slide. We recommend a maximum of 2 hours screen time each day. That's including all activities, everything. If they're doing some IT and they're using emailing, for example, 2 hours per day. We know that the use of screens just before sleep has a very negative impact on closing down the brain, slowing the brain down, because it wants stimulus and it's being stimulated. We need some closing down time before we actually go to sleep. If you're using an e-reader or an electronic source, parents need to be aware that their children's brains are being stimulated. The whole idea of bedtime reading and a nighttime story or a bedtime story is because we want the brain to be winding down and getting ready for sleep. If we're using an e-reader, which I've seen parents reading from an ebook, I've seen parents allow their children to read from an ebook before bed because it winds them and slows them down. It doesn't. It actually stimulates the brain and wants the brain to read more. And so before bed, we need to be reading paper books. We need to be looking through paper books. We need to be talking about and sharing stories to slow ourselves down. Readers recall information in a paperback book, in a paper book, better than an e-reader, and that's from the National Literacy Trust. Readers enjoyed the books more as they were more able to keep up with the plots and the twists and the turns in a story because they were able to look back, find out for themselves, problem solve. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Amanda has just said from Macmillan that we can give books. I have got books that I've been given from childhood, and I know when speaking with Amanda about this, you've got old books, the fabric books, the cardboard books, the plastic books that we were given as children. I've got books that have been written in. The first book that I had published, I wrote in it and I gave it my son, and he's still got it to this day. On an e-reader, you miss that. You miss that emotional contact with the story. We miss that personal information and relationship that you have with a paper book. And this is backed up by evidence. So paper books are here to stay. The next generation of readers have already embraced books. Young adults are the most avaricious readers, with 81% reported to have read books regularly, and paper books at that. Look at the statistics and the data. I've put some statistic data in there for you. You might be able to look back at that at a later date. 81% of people aged 18 to 29 read a book last year. That's actually higher than it would be normally. Wonder why. 72% of people aged 30 to 49 read a book last year. 68% of people aged 65 and older read a book last year. And 74% of 18 to 29-year-olds preferred physical books to ebooks. This data was 2019-2020. Only 4% of children's fiction was published in a digital format in 2019. I think that speaks for itself. This market works to their audience, and only 4% published in digital format. I have had some debates with people, parents and teachers who've got younger children who really argued with me that it's better to read from an e-reader. My child reads much better from an electronic handheld device. Well, I'm not sure about that. Well, I am sure about that. I know that that's wrong. And you know, my research will prove it to you over the next few years. children appear to read better, as I've said, because they seem to be engaged, but they're not always reading at that deeper level. As Amanda just said, your bookshelves reflect your learning through life. And as an academic, I actually do look at people's bookshelves. When people are doing something like this, my bookshelf is over there, out of the way, because I don't judge people, but I think it tells us a lot about a person when you look at the books on the bookshelves in sessions like this. Have you ever found yourself doing that? Okay, so here we've got some more data for you, just because as a scientist, I like to back up what I say with information. So there we are, 2019, 37% of books sold in the United States, but that's because that's where a lot of this research has been carried out. Most of what I've talked to you is UK, Europe, and then here we've got some US information as well. So 37% of print books only were sold, 27% no books, 28% both digital and print. Will ebooks replace? Well, 80% of Americans who read ebooks continue to read paper books also. 90% of book readers are graduates. So the person who was just telling me that they were finding it difficult to research and to do their work because it's all e-readers, I think that tells us that confirms what you just said. It's difficult. 90% of book readers are graduates. 61% high school students. Make sure that they can actually read these books and they can actually access and engage with the information. Let's make sure that we give them this brilliant grounding that we need to. We need them to get this foundation so that they can access this information later on when they're preparing for their assessments. High earners make up 85% of book buyers, 62% low earners. Paper books are not dying, they are evolving. This is all quotes from an author, and she reported that audio sales have nearly doubled since COVID, mostly affecting the print side of books. Looking at my stats for my last 18 months, my sales are roughly 18% print, 27% audio, and 55% ebook. So it's made a difference to her. Paper books are still preferred for nature journals, cookbooks, children's books. And this is a Nielsen study, which was carried out really for parents. So, no, it's not the end of paper books. In 2019, if we can see that physical paper books, 74.4%, all of that, 26, 25%. So it does seem alarming. There is a lot of ebooks resources out there, but we still have a big physical paper existence out there. As educators, we need to be pushing children to read from books when they are learning to read, when they are having sessions where they're learning to read. We need to promote paper books. It's as simple as that. And I'm not saying that for any other reason, because most of my books are ebooks and paper books. Doesn't matter. But children learn better from paper books. So in summary, this was directed on learning to read, not learning for pleasure, learning to read. Ebooks are designed for speed, to glance around. They're designed for skim reading. Paper books support slow-paced processing, patience, and study. Those words are taken from all the research that I've done. Slow-paced, processing, patience, study. That's what paper books support. That's what we are doing as educators. They encourage the reading of longer texts. E-books are for frenetic haste. Therefore, spinning through it and getting a gist of it. Ask them 10 minutes later, no recollection whatsoever. Stores directed at just the sale of books are on the increase, despite the dominance of online retailers. Woo! I love a bookshop. 25%. I've been to lots of bookshops. I remember the bookshop in Kingston. and I've been to the bookshop in Dominica. I love a bookshop. 25% of people reported reading on an ebook in 2019, where 28% did in 2016. Not much to change there then. So what does that tell us? Might be a lot of ebooks around there. They have their purpose, but paper books are where we learn. So that's the end of my session now. So I'm going to pass you over to Raina, who has something interesting to do. And I'm sorry if I've left that too late. Apologies, everyone. Really enjoyed that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Debbie. As always, so enthusiastic. And I can see from the engagement that everyone's very keen to know about your research, particularly myself. So I'm very keen to know more about your research once it's up and running. So thank you again. Just before we finish and we close with some additional information, I'd just like to do a quick poll on how you heard about our webinar. So there's a few bits of information here. Did you hear about this webinar through email or social media? If you can just let me know. If there was another avenue, if you don't mind putting the information in the chat box, it will really help us to know where our attendees are coming from and how they're hearing about our webinars. So email is good. I'll just wait a few more minutes. If you're able to just click on the actual survey itself, if any of the information isn't available, of course, then you can let me know in the other section in the chat box. Great, I'll just give it a few more seconds. While we wait for that, a few more bits of information. The CPD certificate for the session will be available via email automatically as soon as the webinar ends. Please make sure you download the certificate within 2 weeks, as it won't be available after this. The webinar recording will be also sent via email and the PowerPoint presentation within 2 weeks. And also the webinar recording will be available on our Macmillan Caribbean YouTube page as well. I will provide that information in the slide in a moment. Just waiting for a few more people to answer the question and the poll. And then we will end the session. Debbie, do you have any final thoughts just before we end?
Yeah, just thank you so much for being so engaged and writing your comments in the chat there. And thanks to Kingston Bookshop as well. You see, lots of people heard about it from there. So that's wonderful. So if you do hear about these in future, you know, share them with your colleagues, because the more the merrier, really. But you've been a great, fantastic interactive audience today. It made my day. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm just going to share the results just so we can see. It'd be great to know where everyone has been getting the information from.
Francois. I'd love to come to Antigua to get well. I think I need to. No, I'm okay. If I start coughing, I can't stop.
Debbie's been a real trooper today. She hasn't been feeling well, so we really appreciate her delivering the session for us. So thank you for that. I will just go to the final point of our webinar. So just for some further information, if you'd like to know about our resources, please do check out our website. All of our webinars are available on our YouTube channel. For home learning content, please go to our Macmillan Caribbean website. And if you do have any comments about the webinar or any of the research that Debbie has delivered today, please feel free to share your comments via email on caribbean@macmillaneducation.com, and do follow us on social media. So thank you so much, Debbie. As always, it's always a pleasure working with you. Thank you to the attendees for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in an upcoming session soon. Take care for now. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.